Okay, back on the case, back on the hunt of the Great Reset. Well, it's not just the Great Reset. I mean, I'm sure we've had other things to do in our lives than pursue the understanding of the Great Reset. But yeah, we wanted to pick up on the themes that we were speaking about last time.
Yeah.
And we wanted to try and so I mentioned last time I did an article a while back, and so I thought we could look at a few of those quotes, and I think you said also that you had some reflections on what you'd read so far, and to just have a look at both of these things.
Yes. Good.
That's the plan. Okay. So what was it that you were looking at?
So I've been reading COVID-19, The Great Reset, which was written June or finished June 2020. And it's obviously written very quickly, but it was written by Klaus Schwab and another fellow who runs a website that basically feeds, businesses and people sort of information about global structures and events. And my intention was to read this without any prejudice. So to read it, to really just try and get where these people are coming from without throwing up any of my objections, protests, queries, and I found it very difficult because it's a very different kind of mindset. It feels like a very different world because for me, this is a world which I kind of feel around me. But it seems for them, it's very much a world in which they seem to live in. So it's basically completely predicated upon power. So they're only interested in taking note and what to do with power. And I think they might even admit that unabashedly, because it seems to them to be just obvious. So, the questions are about geopolitics, climate, society, and it's all on who's in power and where influence is coming from and going. And then they use essentially sort of wisdom to back that up. So they use their insight and wisdom to investigate power and what to do with.
When you're saying who, could you just clarify again who?
Klaus Schwab, and I want to say Timothy Mallet, but
because
it's not.
I mean, I'm saying that just because I think it's good to call us to task, to take ourselves to task on the words we use. And when you're saying the wisdom of Klaus Schwab and
Thierry Malaret of the Monthly Barometer, a website.
Yeah. So because I'm just struggling with the term wisdom. So I think that's to clarify that. The wisdom that I see is the kind of corporate speak wisdom that in my eyes, it's not the wisdom of a Lao Tzu or
you're right.
a poet. It's the wisdom of a corporate soundbite.
Exactly.
Master of soundbite.
Exactly. It's not a felt wisdom. It's wisdom captured and utilized in service of power. So it's a soundbite. It's effective. So I should have perhaps said insight, but I was classifying it under the terms of the two polarities. There's the power polarity, and then there's what we might call the insight polarity. And we're looking for the middle that has both of those, but embodied in love. And these folks are using both of these, but without the middle, without embodied in love. And essentially they're using that insight in the service.
Again, to clarify insight. So the insight that you're talking about is an analysis of how everything fits together. And then, I mean, I also would like to problematize that word insight, because it's a sight into into a system that is not what I see as insight is something that has value and goodness, and like you say, an insight into a person, that you
Right.
have insight into character. And when you understand that character, you can change and transform for the good. Whereas a cold, hard, technical insight, for example, into people's instincts for fight or flight, that would be a psychological insight, okay, that could be used to manipulate people and to make sure that they do what is in line with certain aims that you've established to enforce a certain direction of behavior. So I think it's like we were speaking about last time, to actually have the two ideas of thinking toward cure, or thinking where one can use psychology and theory and analysis to not to heal, but to
Reorganize and restructure.
drive change towards those power ends that you're talking about.
Yes. They see nothing wrong with power because they see that as the be all and end all. So they're not really interested in the person, the individual, as far as I can get. So you're right, there's no insight into spiritual reality, you know, a human being, the spirit of a thing. But there's more insight into the structures and so forth around it, you know, because these are necessarily involve power. So it's very interesting to read it with the attempt of having no prejudice, because to feel what that feels like, to have this outlook, to live this outlook.
And what was when you read that and you had that feeling of that, could you characterize that? What was that experience that you had, if you were to characterize it?
It's the sense that one feels one has some, let's just call it insight for now, into something. So one necessarily sees the correct way to take things. So it's difficult for me not to say it's this kind of like a smug view of the world, but that's kind of what it feels like. You're sitting on a slightly higher horse because you have the power of insight at your fingertips, and that entails, and they speak about moral responsibility, but it's the responsibility of directing, controlling large groups and even whole populations and a world.
So how do you think, do you get around that if you are these people who have the power to do these things, and they see, of course, that they have connections and more of an idea of what is possible through advances in technology and things like this? So I mean, that's a question.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult because sorry, I thought you were asking, so just to respond to that, because I think it's very difficult, because say if I was in the room with one of these people, I feel like they're missing the love for the person, say, in their whole analysis and exposition. It might be possible to point that out to them in a way which they would see, you know, without insulting them. And then they may feel shame or some sort of remorse and cause a deeper reflection into themselves. But that is going to be an unlikely and a rare situation, because I think more likely as soon as they have any intimation of some such coming towards them, they're going to move away. So do you see what I'm saying? If they're in a press conference and someone asks them a question, what about, you know, the people living in, then
Well, I think in
they,
yeah, I think in that situation, you would be categorized as someone who is ignorant.
yes, it could be dismissed. They would move
Yeah, so
away
you
from
can
it.
be dismissed, or um, someone who does not have themselves under control. So again, these are questions of projection, of where you designate someone as ignorant or less able than you, and then you're able to dismiss their argument, as you said. Because I think the answer to, if you said, well, you're not acting out of love, they would say, well, we are acting out of love, and we know that humanity needs, we need to alleviate poverty, for example, on a wide scale. So is not that love? Is not that, and then you might say, yeah, but you're talking about alleviation of material want, and already you're getting into a territory that they're not going to understand, because someone with a materialistic view of life will not see the spiritual. They will not, or they will interpret all those words according to a materialistic standpoint.
I think love would be would be envisaged as the good oiling of the machine. So if the machine's functioning perfectly, the greatest benefit for the greatest amount, that would be love, regardless of whatever amount it has to be left behind, destroyed, desolated.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing is that you see the love of progress, where you see also scientists who then say, well, the worst thing, the worst thing for the world and the planet is humanity itself. So I mean, people really do say this, because
Yes.
they've fallen in love so much with their materialistic training in sciences,
The
that they then,
calculation is such.
yeah, the calculation is such that if we remove human beings, then the world will regenerate and become, and these become beautiful. And these are wonderful examples of the projection of individual psychology onto the world, where you say the utopia will be there, but we will all be no longer here. And it's really, what's lying underneath that from an anthroposophical point of view is Eden. It's Eden. It's, yeah, that's what is actually the real living picture behind that view, that once we solve once we solve everything and we are no longer here, we are then spiritual, and the earth is beautiful and healed, but we're just not in it. So it's that split of consciousness between the materialistic point of view can't envisage an evolving, transformative, organic world. So it has to split them off and say, well, let's have utopia here for no one, and we're dead, and that's better. And we've come to this incredible situation where it's because someone has a PhD and works at, I don't know, wherever, that we don't call these things out, or these things are not up for debate. It's the same with, you know, when the discussions that have been going on since 2020 that can't be had, because anyway,
Yeah. They they their insights are in models. So they're not real insights, as you intimated, they're not real insights into the reality of people and things and beings, but it's models. So everything's like, yeah, this kind of fantasy. It's a unreal reality. And
Really? Sorry, he came in the last one and he's back again. He's got something to say. What do you want? Anyway, sorry, that's a major distraction.
yeah.
Can
So
you just repeat what you just said? Because I was, please.
they are working, essentially their ideas are models of reality, so they're unreal. They're not actually, they don't, from what I've read, I haven't found that they've actually sort of looked at reality in all its sort of crunchiness, but it's more models of reality. So they're able to paint great sort of pictures and scopes and
Yeah.
very impressive.
Yeah, this is a great, I think this is a good point to come in here with this painting pictures and this kind of utopian thinking. And I think it's important to bring some examples here. So one of the headings on when I wrote the essay here about the Great Reset was the analogy of the sick ship. And I'll just read to you this and just see what your thoughts are on this, because it ties into exactly what you're saying right now. So it says in section 111 of the Great Reset, it's titled Interdependence. And it says here the UN and WEF, World Economic Forum, connected Kishore Mahbubani, academic and diplomat from Singapore, topically added to the boat analogy with the idea of the plague ship in 2020. Now, this is the quote. If we, 7.5 billion people, are now stuck together in a virus-infected cruise ship, does it make sense to clean and scrub only our personal cabins while ignoring the corridors and air wells outside through which the virus travels? The answer is clearly no. Yet this is what we have been doing. Since we are now in the same boat, humanity has to take care of the global boat as a whole.
The implication, this is in the book, the implication being, if there's states that are not sweeping their cabins and outside their cabins sufficiently, there should be some overall controller that forces them to do it or goes in and does it themselves, whether they want it or not.
Yeah, so I mean, we can, of course, we can read through this and here there's the underlying ideology of a world. Of course, these are spokespeople for the United Nations, the World Economic Forum. So
And
of course there's that force.
They want a world government because they see that is the necessary, not a world brother sisterhood of people helping each other, but it has to be a government, i.e. a power structure to control.
Yeah, but what I find striking here is the evocation of this image of the sick ship, that humanity is on a sick ship, and where is it going? And we are the ones responsible for the clean and efficient sailing of that ship. And it evokes all kinds of images. And the feeling I get sometimes is with these similar kind of pronouncements is that these are people that are kind of longing for a kind of poetry in maybe perhaps in their lives, and they I often get the feeling like when I read these statements, it's like, well, go and write poetry, go and study arts, because I'm not sure that it's well put in ideas of global governance, or do you know what I mean? Or at least
Absolutely.
to become a bit more educated in that sense and say, well, you could read some of the plays of Shakespeare about different ships that get caught up in storms, and they're part of a spiritual path
Yeah.
where the hero comes to himself, and or that all the analogies of Jonah and the whale and things like this. And so I feel that there's a spiritual longing and something behind these kinds of pronouncements, but they get so then stuck on the power aspect. Yeah. And then instead of it being part of a beautiful artwork and journey of the soul, it becomes we need to purify the ship, and it needs to be swept clean and disinfected, and
Yes. Yes.
and immediately we're in a very horrible kind of you have these awful visions then. And I think this has come for a lot of people, all of those visions, not just visions but realities, since 2020. If you think of the kind of people in masks and white coats and things like this, and just kind of very disturbing imagery of fear, of intense fear.
Yes, that's wonderful. You said that because you've touched on the sadness that they are expressing, and the compassion that evokes.
Yeah. I do feel there's a sadness here. If you actually go into that image of a sick ship or a plague ship, there's, you can almost, and I think in the kind of collective unconscious, if you wanted to go down that track, those times of, we used to have it here, it's the first time it was ever stopped. It was this year. We have what's called the Sebastian singers, and they, in the time of the plague, they would go around and sing at each of the fountains to protect them. Like, there was 12 men, and they have a lantern, and they go around the different fountains in the city, and they would sing to Mary and Joseph and the blessing of Saint Sebastian, so that they could, if they would go and heal those who had the plague. And this is then sung every Christmas Eve and every New Year's Eve. And since 2020, that this was the first time when it was, when it was, I think one of them was called off. And
That's ironic.
yeah, and that, the first time in 400 years, that those, I mean, also Fastnacht was cancelled in Basel.
What's that?
But anyway, I mean, I don't want to go too far, because I'm always a bit concerned about what will stay up on YouTube.
I think you've hit the nub.
About
Yeah.
topics, then again, you can say that. I don't think it's a problem to be open and transparent about that, but I don't know what the trigger words are, and I don't even think it's necessary to go into the whole debate about. I think I'm more interested in this process that we are trying to do, to accompany, to follow, to go deeper into these people's to the soul of the people who do make these pronouncements from the WEF or the United Nations. And the other thing that I find staggering is, in light of what has happened, why we don't have a debate that actually national policy is often overridden by global governance. And again, this is it doesn't seem to come up for debate. And I think that's rather shocking that it doesn't come up for debate in Parliament, for example, where one might say, is it not funny that every country in the world is now following the same policy, and that's been determined by the United Nations and the World Health Organization and the World Economic Forum? And what about our own? I mean, was there any country that was able to have an independent policy? I think Sweden tried it, didn't they?
I think there was lots of variations of the main policy, and I think there were probably one or two completely different policies that we didn't hear about. You know, I heard things in Africa and so forth, but the people in charge of those were sort of quickly removed, and the main policy peoples were put in place. I think we don't hear about it so much.
Yeah.
And that's interesting in the book, in that they don't look at the alternatives. There's only this one way of doing it. There's no consideration. Okay, this is one view. Let's have a completely different view, and perhaps one where, you know, it's really difficult to speak about, because, like you said, you'll just be poo-pooed and ridiculed if you talk about bring the heart back to it, bring the arts back to it. But that is what is missing. That it really is, and that's what this world has forgotten, is there is real power and wisdom, but hopefully through love in the arts, uniting, you know, the insights and the technologies in a manner which they're incapable to do on their own.
Well, see what you think of this. This is again leading on from what we're saying, and this is again from the Great Reset. It says here, quote, "The societal upheaval unleashed by the pandemic will last for years and possibly generations. The most immediate and visible impact is that many governments will be taken to task, with a lot of anger directed at these policymakers and political figures that have appeared inadequate or ill-prepared in terms of their response to dealing with it."
Yeah, that was the kind of thing which I found very difficult just to take on board as is, because you know, it does beg the question that completely disregards, sweeps away a huge set of people that that question the people that were implementing the policies as given. So sorry, I should just to clarify, because that what you just read doesn't actually implies, in the context of the rest of the text, that if that people might complain that governments didn't lock their countries down quick enough and didn't give things quickly enough to everybody, whether they wanted it or not. That's the context in which that was expressed in the book, but not that they never mentioned the context where there's people saying, hang on, there's an alternative. You know, we could have used different substances as therapy and remedy, and it's very interesting in the book that they instantly seem to conflate, without distinguishing a disease and the response to it. For them, it's all one thing. So that the total effects are all one thing, but they don't, you know, that's what these last 2 years were. Instead of saying there's a disease and then there's the response, and they both had effects. And you know, they can be separated, because you could take one away and have a different response with a different effect, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't contemplate that.
Mm-hmm.
So where I'm left with the text and with them is that I'm beginning to gain some understanding of where they're coming from, but I still need to go a long way towards warming myself to them and their stance. But what you've been saying about the arts, it will help that a lot.
Mm-hmm. What do you mean? What I've been saying about the arts? Could
But
you
maybe
just tell me
but
what I've
maybe
been?
that they're missing some poetry in their life and they're crying out for it.
Well, this is again. It's like when you read a text, I feel that you can see that soul and where they are at, and um, I see them like I would a student or a client, and I think, well, Klaus Schwab, see him in his grey jumpsuit. He's like, isn't it strangely? I think I'm gonna show.
Is this the Star Trek sort of one?
Indeed. Indeed. So, I mean, I
It's
think
the
I can even
Klingon.
I think I can even show it here. If
Yes,
I
it's funny because you would get somebody. Oh, I've forgotten his name. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's notorious. A lot of people know this, so I maybe don't even have to show it. But Klaus Schwab in his grey, almost Star Trek like, with of course, his well-known, customary, very serious expression, and then sometimes pictured with his wife, and again, he has a badge, like a strange insignia, and of course he will be in some kind of society, and I mean, as an esoteric, some form of esoteric society, because a lot of
A secret club,
a secret
or
club.
or an actual
No,
one with a shop on the Broad Street.
no, I mean,
Smoking men's club or a
yeah, or
secret.
no, I mean, an occult, an esoteric group of some sort, and
It
this,
seems that way. Yeah.
yeah, and then there's an insignia that he has. Maybe I should.
Yeah, those signals seem to be flagging up something of that sort.
So I
Otherwise,
think,
you can imagine him at home with his wife. Hey, shall I wear this one today? The futuristic one. She's like, yeah,
yeah, and like having
nice.
had kind of fun with it, but that's not the impression I get, because there's always this very serious. Okay, here it is. I'm just gonna.
I mean, this one, it might attract in places like South America, there's huge organizations that are into like UFOs and futurology. It may be
The
attracting that kind of
Raelian
Raelian type thing.
Society.
Yeah. So
Well,
that kind of garb would not go amiss in that
okay, so
scenario.
I mean, I just did this silly meme, but
Yes.
this is me playing around with.
I mean, this could be him being artistic, and he's just introducing a possible future look.
Yeah, I
Everyone.
mean, I don't. If even if you look at the face, there's even a kind of a vague smile.
Yeah.
Like, it is, you can find the smile in there, and
Yeah.
um, okay, this is me playing around with his accent, but I coach, I teach people to improve their speech. So again, I'm trying
You
to,
notice it a lot.
yeah. So, but I'm intrigued as to the brooch, which is, I think, there's almost like a tree and maybe some nature and some runes or something like this. But so,
Runes.
yeah, and I let's maybe shut him down. Let's shut Klaus Schwab down.
Invite him to our house for some tea and cake and a painting session.
But it's something I've noticed before in people that are very people who have gone very far in the academic world, and they have their position that they do need to sustain, and they do have certain responsibilities, and to maintain one narrative, because the nature of our world is the silo effect, where everything becomes so specialized that you have your area of expertise. And for example, Klaus Schwab has to keep on. He's the figurehead of the WEF, and he has to have that ideology.
It's strange, isn't it? No one ever sort of stops, goes, hang on a minute, I've been wrong all my life. Turns around.
Yeah, or even if you said, you know what, Klaus, you've had a good run, the old China. There's maybe it's better to have a younger spokesman. When he was like 50, I mean, he's in his mid 80s now. You could have had a younger spokesman at 55, and that we would have had 30 years of a different kind of WEF. But what I find interesting is when you go down that route of ever harder consolidation.
Yeah, it's always doubling up, isn't it? It's like,
I wonder what happens
down,
then to the soul. And it's something I've seen in numerous times, where you read an academic book that may be 300, 400 pages, and you could summarize the key ideas of that book in an hour. I mean, you must have the same experience sometimes. You read the book of a certain philosopher or thinker, and you can boil it down to its essence as 4 or 5 ideas.
Yeah.
And then you think of the person who is actually writing that book, and you think, there's so much intellectual baggage that comes along. And that's what I perceive is often, if you read carefully what lies kind of hidden in the book, is this soul that is longing for color, for art, for spiritual experience. And then it comes out in this way, like with Klaus Schwab, where he has this almost like a little boy smile, and wearing a Star Trek outfit and a little brooch. I mean, I used to do stuff like that when I was like 9. I had a little. I'm not being like condescending.
No.
It's like I had a little gold bird, and so there's a kind of, I think it's important to recognize that
it's lovely, really, to notice that innocent, playful part.
Yeah, and at the same time, I can imagine at the same time, you don't want to go too far. You have to remember that the ideas being put forward are about people losing their livelihoods, restaurants, local businesses, small businesses that don't adapt to the new system, forced into receivership, into bankruptcy, and people's mental health issues that have exploded in the last 2 years. And so again, as much as one goes into this sympathy for these characters, it's always to remember that
not
the
sympathy,
price is,
but empathy.
Empathy is probably better, because what we're trying to work out is how people are able to not have empathy for vast numbers of people in the world who have been affected by such policies. And or shall be affected. And the answer from their side would be, well, this is all the march towards a bright and glorious future.
Yeah, we
And
have to be careful though, Richard, if I may interrupt, because you said
yeah,
we want to just to be careful. We want to work out how these people can be like this, as it were. But then the danger there is falling into the same trap, which is if we work out how that motivation works, then we can fix it. But I know this is not really what you're trying to say, but I think it's good to remind ourselves it's about understanding that person. Do you know what I'm saying? Because we do have technical terms for great forces, but just to sort of abstractly recognize them, it's really we want to get to the person. And I think that's, it's only then that if you give a disturbed person attention, they will start to feel it. Even that will start to be a cure, a healing.
Yeah, I agree. And I think one always has the feeling like that we have to justify and explain this kind of approach. And I think it's something very different in the world to actually talk in this way. I think it's a way people are not accustomed to. So what we're accustomed to is to go in and say, what are the merits of this point of view and what are the merits of the other point of view, and then we shall engage in debate. And I don't know why I'm speaking in this strange like 1920s voice, but in a way we haven't moved on from that kind of
rather rigid.
We just we don't sound as rigid, but I think we're still rather rigid in that sense. So it's just claiming back some of these basic spiritual principles that of empathy.
And I think it works like this, in that in Waldorf Steiner education, if say there was a child who was experiencing a lot of difficulties in a class, the whole school of teachers would get together and they'd do what's commonly called child study. And so you would just study that child together in a group, and in a very empathic way, just in the sense of building up as warm and as deeper picture of them as one could. And so then you're seeing past what we meet in the child day to day. You're seeing past that what they're born into and their situation. And then I think what then can happen is that something that is lacking in them, that is them, is then able to come into them more. Somehow that loving attention upon them is like a salve that enables them, and they can almost like miraculously sort of recover, develop in ways that are not possible when you sort of put this thing in place, this thing, just the attention. And so that surely is possible also with world leaders and so forth. Something about what they are looking for, that poetry and the depth in their lives that they haven't met, and is causing them such sort of sadness and motivation to correct things. Somehow
I just maybe on that that note, I'd just bring something maybe to round this off. And this is something about the life of Klaus Schwab. It's not a secret. It can be found out there in the World Wide Web of things. And this, so I just thought I'd bring this at the end, because I think it raises some interesting perspectives on what we've been saying, and going into the life of this person, and also reflecting on what has happened and since 2020, and where ideas and words come to us. And something you and I have been debating is this idea of an elite, and how this so-called elite live.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's a bit going on in the lines of these things. So this is, the reference here is to Cologne. I might not be pronouncing this correctly, but Cologne is in the west French-speaking part of Switzerland, near Geneva, and it's headquarters of the World Economic Forum, and it's the home of Klaus Schwab. So I'll just show it here just quickly. But so that's his home. And
that's
so
lovely.
it's a lovely place. And the foundation, Martin Bodmer. Now, Martin Bodmer was the founder of the Bodmer Library, which is known as the Foundation Martin Bodmer in Cologne, which is just outside Geneva. And he was a collector of papyri, manuscripts, and by 1939 he had accumulated 60,000 volumes. So it was quite a significant library. And Martin Bodmer was vice president of the International Red Cross from 1940 until his death in 1971. In 1951, he relocated to Cologne, and the Bibliotheca Bodmeriana was inaugurated. Martin Bodmer Naville was also a publisher. He launched in 1930 a bi-monthly German literary review, which published writers such as Rilke, Thomas Mann, R. Kasner, and Hofmannsthal. And by a strange twist of fate, the name of the journal was Corona Nova. And Martin Bodmer died in 31st of March 1971, one day after Klaus Schwab's 33rd birthday of the same year in 1971. And straight after this, Klaus Schwab founded the WEF in Cologne. So it's just a brief excerpt from Klaus Schwab's life. And what interests me is how the ideas that we're surrounded by do accompany us through our lives. And I find it interesting, the name of of his, by a strange twist of fate, that the name of this journal was Corona Nova, like a new corona, a new crown. And then also looking at Klaus Schwab on his 33rd birthday, and we know from anthroposophy the importance of this year, that somehow this person who lived, this collector of art, who lived right next door to where he lives, and knew the family and himself, that this person would die. And at this point, Klaus Schwab then is the founder then of the World Economic Forum in that place. So I think it's interesting that this idea of art, and that this journal was publishing Rilke, and I don't know the names of the other German poets there, but
shall we go and look at the
I think that would be a wonderful spiritual deed, to actually go to, I mean, I'm going to Geneva soon, and again, to go there, I think it's a very interesting deed to go to the place. I'm sure you'll be able to visit and see those papyri and see those manuscripts. And
I'm wondering what they are about. What maybe some inspiration in his youth.
yeah, I think it's interesting. I know that there was some also links back to some of the other families of Zurich with connections back to Venice. And so again, it's like it's saying, okay, this is a world that's very different to our lowly existences in comparison. But if you're interested in arts and things like this, these are places that are open for people to take an interest. And I think the more that one does that, perhaps, who knows? I mean, if you imagine a world where perhaps you could at some point bring the debate about the Great Reset back to maybe questions of art and principles of what is good and valuable, and maybe that would be an opening.
Yes, lovely.
Anyway, so what is there anything we need to round off?
No, I'm very
That's it.
thankful for this opportunity, Richard.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm thankful for it too.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah, I think it's good to explore some of these things, and hopefully we stay on track. And we'll see how we're going. Maybe we can still keep going with this for another week on Klaus Schwab and the Great Reset, or who knows? I mean, have a look at it though. You can look up the Bodmer Library,
Okay.
and maybe there's nothing more to say on this. When we come to it, next week. But we'll see. I mean, we'll stay in touch, and
Super.
we'll be back on this next week.
Okay. Bye for now.